morning to all of you in different places. And first of all, I should say that more than all the efforts I've taken, it is a pleasure for being with all of you that has brought me here. And I see a lot of efforts being put forth by this institution. And Professor Punia has been so involved in all this. So we are sort of, overwhelmingly, we enjoy coming here and doing this course with all of you. I know that there are several locations here, and connecting to all of you and talking to all of you and sharing some of our experiences is definitely, I think, a very useful experience for both of us from that side as well as from this side. We also learn a lot from the questions you ask. So with this, without wasting too much time, I'll start the actual lecture. The first topic on which I'm supposed to speak is two-stroke engines. If you look at two-stroke engines, it was actually invented long time back. In fact, in the present form, it was invented by one called Professor Sir Joseph Day. It was as early as 1891, and there were many developments. And even before that, Sir Dougal Clark in the 19th century, actually he also came out with a model of a two-stroke engine. So lots of developments have taken place. There have been stalwarts who have been working in this. There was Professor G.P. Blair, late Professor G.P. Blair in Queen's University, Belfast. A lot of work has been done in the industries. A lot of work has been done in India also in many industries and educational institutions on two-stroke engines. So currently, we find that two-stroke engines, it appears that two-stroke engines are gradually going out. In fact, that was a feeling that everyone has. But then we find that in many applications, you cannot replace the two-stroke engine. There are several applications where it has to stay. And of late, there have been a lot of developments in fuel injection systems and also in electronic controls. So we find that more and more of these being implemented in two-stroke engines, and the two-stroke engines becoming equivalent to four-stroke engines in terms of efficiency and emissions, and in terms of power to weight ratio, they are better. So there are new applications also coming, about which we'll also discuss. So if you look at the current things that are facing the two-stroke engines, it is the efficiency, emissions. These two are the important problems which we associate with the two-stroke engine currently, and say that because of this, they are not as good as the four-stroke engines. But we'll see that there are ways of improving it and coming to as good, making them as good as a four-stroke engine. Now, current efforts are on reducing emissions and improving efficiency. And we all know that two-stroke engines are widely used in places like scooters, then mopeds, snowmobiles, and also in handheld power tools. And of late, they are also being used in hybrids. People are looking at hybrid applications where you have an engine power pack as well as a battery, and the engine power pack is used only for short times when you want to limp home back when the battery is exhausted and things like that. And in such applications, I find the two-stroke engine is ideal because it's a very small power pack, very compact, and very high power to weight ratio. So these are what we do. And with hybrids, people make use of advanced fuel injection systems. So advanced fuel injection systems are employed, and these hybrids, the engines, two-stroke engines in these hybrids are as efficient as a four-stroke engine. Now, with this background, let us move on to how a two-stroke engine works, and then we'll move on to how we can see that we can improve the two-stroke engine. The basic two-stroke engine has got an exhaust port. You know that the two-stroke engine doesn't have valves. It has an exhaust port. Then it has a crankcase. Then it has the transfer ports. So you have transfer ports which are located below the exhaust port. So if you look at the transfer ports, they are below the exhaust port. So the basic two-stroke engine is something like this. This we call as a transfer port, and this we call as the exhaust port. And the piston is somewhere over here at bottom dead center. near bottom dead center. The piston is somewhere here. And you find that the level of the transfer port, as I told you, is slightly above the level of the exhaust port. So basically, when the piston moves up and down, when the piston moves from top dead center, which we call as TDC, to BDC, let us assume that the piston is initially at top dead center, somewhere here, at this location. Then the piston comes down. It first opens the exhaust port. So if I were to draw the port timing diagram of this engine, if this is top dead center and this is bottom dead center, when the piston comes down, it first opens the exhaust port. We call it EPO. So as the piston comes down, it first opens this exhaust port. Then after some time, it opens the transfer port. We call this TPO. And then symmetrically, it first closes the transfer port and then closes the exhaust port. EPC and TPC are exhaust port and transfer port closure. So this is the sequence of events that you see in a two-stroke engine. So when the piston moves down, let us say the piston is moving from top dead center to the bottom dead center, and you have hot gases pushing the piston down under pressure. So the piston moves down, first it opens the exhaust port. And the moment it opens the exhaust port, the exhaust gases rush out, and we call this the blow down process. So exhaust gases rush out of the cylinder and the pressure falls. And meanwhile, if you look at what is happening in the crankcase, this is the crankcase. Meanwhile, if you look at what is happening in the crankcase, the pressure of the crankcase is going up because the piston is just compressing whatever is there in the crankcase. And after some time, when the piston moves down beyond the exhaust port's topmost point, you find that the transfer port opens. When the transfer port opens, the compressed fresh charge, which was taken earlier, I'll tell how it was taken earlier, is pushed into the cylinder through this passage, and the compressed fresh charge comes through the cylinder, and the exhaust gases are also leaving out through the exhaust port. So we have what is called as a loop formed in the cylinder, the fresh charge coming like this, and the exhaust gases going like this. The fresh charge comes like this from the crankcase. So you have the fresh charge coming and pushing the exhaust gases out, and we call this process the scavenging process. So scavenging is basically we call this the scavenging process, and scavenging is basically removing the exhaust from the cylinder and filling the cylinder with fresh fuel air mixture. Now the fresh fuel air mixture comes from the atmosphere. Of course, you have what is called as a reed valve or a one-way valve, which is supposed to allow the fresh charge from the atmosphere into the combustion into the crankcase. And you may have a carburetor here, and air comes from the atmosphere, fuel also comes here, and air and fuel get into the crankcase through this reed valve. Reed valve is one method of allowing the fresh fuel air mixture into the crankcase. So now let me repeat: when the piston moves up, the pressure in the bottom of the piston drops. So fresh fuel air mixture comes from the atmosphere through this reed valve, and then picks up fuel from the carburetor and enters into the crankcase. And meanwhile, you find that on the top of the piston, you have compression of the gases being done. And the piston reaches top dead center, there's a spark on the top, and combustion occurs in the regular way. Then piston moves down, the exhaust port opens first, and we have what is called as blow down, which occurs first. And then the transfer port opens and the fresh charge comes inside and pushes the exhaust out. And this process is called scavenging. Meanwhile, as the piston is moving out, we are taking fresh fuel air mixture through the carburetor once again. So this cycle keeps on repeating. And if you look at this portion where the exhaust port is open and the transfer port is not yet open, this we call as the blow down process. And this we also call as exhaust lead. That is, the exhaust port actually leads the transfer port. But what really happens at the end of the process is that the exhaust port closes after the transfer port closes. This is a problem. The exhaust port need not close after the transfer port closes. In fact, the exhaust port ideally should close even before the transfer port closes, because if it closes after the transfer port closes, whatever has been taken into the cylinder, there is a chance of its going out of the cylinder, and in the short circuiting will be more. So this is the basic working of the two-stroke engine. And if you look at the two-stroke engine, there are several issues related to the working of the two-stroke engine. The most important issue is that the fresh charge which comes from the transfer port can go out through the exhaust port, and this is what we call as short circuiting of the charge. Now this short circuiting of the charge means that some fuel is actually going out of the cylinder, and you will reduce the fuel efficiency. You will also increase the hydrocarbon emissions. The other problem which we have in the two-stroke engine is the fresh charge is not fully able to drive all the exhaust out, and you will have some retained exhaust. And this we call as charge dilution. So you can have what is called as charge dilution. You can have what is called as short circuiting. These are the two main problems of the two-stroke engine. But the main advantage is that in every revolution you get a power stroke. So you see plus and minus points of the two-stroke engine, and we'll see how we look at different aspects of the two-stroke engine and how it can be improved further. So basically, the processes that we have seen in the two-stroke engine are charging, that is taking the fresh fuel air mixture into the crankcase. Then we have scavenging, and scavenging is composed of blowdown, where the exhaust rushes out between the exhaust port opening point and transfer port opening point. And then you have the fresh mixture intake into the cylinder when the transfer port opens to transfer port closes, and this fresh mixture is pushing the exhaust out. And then you also have what is called as the combustion taking place on the top of the piston. The pressure goes up and then the piston is pushed down. So these are the main processes that occur in the two-stroke engine. This charging occurs into the crankcase, and the scavenging occurs in the cylinder. So, and we also saw that this charging is through the crankcase, so it is not very complete. We'll see very soon. And the scavenging is the one which leads to problems like short circuiting and charge dilution. So these are the main problems, and these problems lead to high hydrocarbon emissions because short circuiting is fuel, and high thermal efficiency is low, hydrocarbon emissions are high, and this charge dilution we'll see very soon will lead to rich mixtures. We'll need rich mixtures, and rich mixtures means the carbon monoxide emissions also will be high. So basically in a two-stroke engine you have high hydrocarbons, low efficiency, relatively high carbon monoxide, but the main advantage is power to weight ratio is high, and it is smooth in performance. So these things we'll see as we proceed. So this has sort of set the background for what we want to see. And the port timing diagrams we saw already. I'll just repeat it once again. We have the exhaust port opening which opens first, then we have the transfer port which opens next, and symmetrically transfer port closes first and exhaust port closes next. If this is and this is top dead center, and this is bottom dead center. So this is what we saw as a port timing diagram, and this we saw as the exhaust lead. And the exhaust lead is important because during the exhaust lead, if you look at what we saw earlier, the hot exhaust at high pressure from the cylinder has to go out and allow the fresh charge to come inside. So during the exhaust lead, the pressure in the cylinder has to fall from the cylinder pressure to the crankcase pressure. So exhaust lead has to be given, and during this time the pressure in the cylinder falls to the crankcase pressure. So this has to happen. So if we need time for this, and this time is given by the exhaust lead. But this exhaust lead means that you are closing the exhaust port later than the transfer port, you get problems of short circuiting because of that. So these are the inherent problems in a two-stroke engine. Now coming to the charge in the two-stroke engine, if you look at the charge in the cylinder in the two-stroke engine, it will be composed of fresh air plus fuel. It will also be composed of the retained exhaust, and this is what we call as charge dilution. And this retained exhaust does not allow the fresh charge to burn well, and you're forced to use rich mixtures. So normally in a two-stroke engine, we are forced to use rich mixtures. We are forced to use rich mixtures, and these rich mixtures also lead to CO emissions. Now coming to the lubrication of the two-stroke engine, we know in a four-stroke engine, we can always put the lubricating oil in the crankcase, and you can fill some lubricating oil in the crankcase, and then this lubricating oil in the crankcase will stay in the crankcase. In the two-stroke engine, whereas you find that the air which is coming from the atmosphere gets into the crankcase and then into the cylinder, and when it does this, you cannot put lubricating oil in the crankcase. So we need to have other methods of lubricating the engine. So we use what is called as petroil lubrication, which means we mix the lubricating oil with petrol which goes into the cylinder. So we mix it in a particular fraction, which may be something like 1 to 2% of the amount of fuel. 1 to 2% of the amount of fuel may be mixed along with the fuel, and I mean 1 to 2% of the fuel would be oil, and this will be mixed with the fuel, and it will be taken along with air and fuel into the cylinder. So this fuel will get into the crankcase, it will touch all the moving parts of the engine, it will also go into the cylinder, touch all the moving parts of the engine, and then lubricate, and this lubricant will be lost. So it is lost lubrication. So the lubricant is lost. So another problem with the two-stroke engine would be high lubricating oil consumption, and also emissions because of this lubricating oil, and deposits because of this lubricating oil. So people have tried to reduce this problem, or sort of bring down this problem, by making use of oil injection. They don't mix the oil and petrol together, they don't mix it in the same proportion. So there is a small oil pump which injects the required amount of oil into the air stream, and this small amount of oil goes into the cylinder and then lubricates different parts. The advantage is that the oil to fuel ratio is not fixed here, and it is varied depending on the operating condition. So this is a better system and uses lesser oil, and it has brought down emission levels. Now we'll move on to the next thing, which is a PV diagram of a two-stroke engine. Now the PV diagram of a two-stroke engine, I'll try to link the PV diagram to the valve timing diagram. So I'm drawing the valve timing diagram in a slightly different angle here. This is top dead center, this is bottom dead center, and this is the exhaust port, opening, and exhaust port closing, and this is the transfer port opening and transfer port closing. And I'll just bring all this down. So this x-axis basically represents volume and y-axis is pressure. So TDC to BDC change difference is actually the volume, and I'll try to plot the pressure pressure changes, and here I'll show that this pressure is ambient pressure, and the pressure in the crankcase is actually slightly above ambient pressure. I'll call it PCC. This is crankcase pressure. So Normally what happens is compression starts from a pressure which is slightly above the crankcase pressure, because the cylinder is likely to be filled at crankcase pressure, but it doesn't happen so, because the cylinder is actually exposed to the atmosphere during the start of the compression process, because the exhaust port is open. So I'll just trace what happens as we come from the expansion process. Let us say that we have started expanding from a high pressure. So this is the expansion process after combustion. At this point, the exhaust port opens. The moment the exhaust port opens, we saw what is called as a blowdown. So pressure significantly drops, and in fact we want this pressure to actually drop to the crankcase pressure. We want the pressure to actually drop to the crankcase pressure, because unless it drops to the crankcase pressure, we will not be able to actually open the transfer port. So we want this pressure to drop from here to the crankcase pressure, which is here, and this is the pressure of the crankcase. So this process is called blowdown. So the moment the exhaust port opens, there's a drop in pressure, and after this point you have the transfer port opening, and when the transfer port opens, ideally the pressure should be at least equal to the crankcase pressure or lower than the crankcase pressure, and after that what happens, the pressure gradually falls down to nearly ambient pressure, because the exhaust port and transfer port are open. So then the compression of the process, then the compression starts from here, and till the exhaust port is closed, actually compression may not start at all, because you're still exposing the gases to the atmosphere, and compression ideally starts only after the exhaust port is closed. So this becomes the compression process, and then you have combustion, and then you have your expansion. So this point is exhaust port closing, this point is transfer port closing. So the point I want to make here is, when the exhaust port is about to open, the pressure in the cylinder is higher, considerably higher than atmospheric. The moment the exhaust port opens, there is a sudden drop in pressure due to blowdown, and this is crankcase pressure, and we want the pressure to fall to the crankcase pressure when the transfer port is about to open. And after the transfer port opens also, there is a further drop in pressure, because the ports are exposed to the atmosphere. Ultimately at BDC we nearly reach the atmospheric pressure. Then when we start moving the piston from BDC to TDC, we cannot compress till the exhaust port is closed, because the cylinder is exposed to atmosphere. Then afterwards we have the compression process, then the combustion and expansion. We may have the spark somewhere here. So this becomes the PV diagram of the two-stroke engine, and we see that right here on the PV diagram, the PV diagram is very different from what you will see in a four-stroke engine, because in the four-stroke engine you almost completely expand down to BDC, up to the point where the intake valve, up to the point where the exhaust valve opens. Whereas the two-stroke engine, you don't expand down to the BDC. There is some loss in power. This also means that there is loss in work, because you are forced to open the exhaust port earlier. This is typical of a two-stroke engine. The other point to note is, you should give sufficient time between exhaust port opening and transfer port opening, so that the pressure in the cylinder at the point where the transfer port opens is equal to or lesser than the crankcase pressure. Otherwise the fresh charge will not flow from the crankcase. Now I'll just quickly list some of the advantages of a two-stroke engine. The first advantage of the two-stroke engine is the high power to weight ratio. It has a very high power to weight ratio. The second advantage is uniform torque, because every cycle, every revolution you have a power stroke, so the torque is more or less uniform. Whereas in a four-stroke engine, the power stroke comes once, and then after two revolutions it comes, so there is a drop in torque, again it raises, so it is more uniform torque. Then the third advantage is, you have NOx emissions which are low. This is because of charge dilution. I told you that charge dilution is nothing but exhaust being retained inside the cylinder and mixing with the fresh air, and charge dilution is like EGR, exhaust gas recirculation, and with charge dilution you find that your NOx levels automatically come down, because it is almost like exhaust gas dilution. The other advantage which you see in two-stroke engines is, it needs a small flywheel because the torque is more uniform. So the engine can accelerate quickly and decelerate quickly. It is simple because there are no valves, easy to maintain because again there are no valves, no complicated parts and things like that. It has less moving parts. Its friction is low. It has low friction, so it has got a high mechanical efficiency. And mostly of all this, what we can say is the most significant advantage is the high power to weight ratio. So it is very compact. There are several other advantages also of the two-stroke engine. I have just tried to list the main advantages of the two-stroke engine. But the most important advantage is that it can give you very high power outputs for a small weight. The two-stroke engine, as we are seeing now, is only the two-stroke spark ignition engine, as we call it the SI engine. But there is also what is called a two-stroke compression ignition engine, which is called the two-stroke CI engine or the two-stroke diesel engine. We are not dealing with that, but the two-stroke diesel engine is also very popular because two-stroke very large engines are all two-stroke engines. But today's lecture does not concern two-stroke diesel engines. We are looking at mostly two-stroke spark ignition engines. Next, coming to the disadvantages of the two-stroke engines. In fact, most of the disadvantages of the two-stroke engines are because of or because of short circuiting and poor scavenging. So this short circuiting and poor scavenging leads to several disadvantages. First of all, short circuiting is HC emissions, fuel loss, and even energy loss, because when you lose fuel, you lose energy. When you lose fuel, you also get hydrocarbons in the exhaust. So high hydrocarbons, low efficiency, fuel being lost directly into the exhaust are all a result of short circuiting. Poor scavenging means charge dilution as well as short circuiting, which means that you are not able to push all the exhaust out from the cylinder and retain all the charge inside. So these are the main problems. And these main problems, as I told you just now, the thermal efficiency of a two-stroke engine will be low. This is one of the biggest disadvantages. The second big disadvantage is that the HC emissions will be high. And HC emissions are high because of short circuiting and also because of charge dilution. Short circuiting means directly HC goes out. Charge dilution means the fuel that is within the cylinder does not burn properly. So that also leads to hydrocarbon emissions. The third disadvantage is the temperatures in a two-stroke engine are high. Why is it that the temperatures in a two-stroke engine are high? Because every revolution you have a power stroke, so the component temperatures become high. And one of the ways to reduce, of course, we know that if the component temperatures are high, the engine could fail. And one of the ways to avoid these high temperatures is to do good cooling. But there is only to some extent that you can do external cooling. So we do what is called as internal cooling. Internal cooling is actually a very vague term, but what we actually mean by internal cooling is use a rich mixture. That is, you use more fuel than what is actually required. So when you take more petrol than what is actually required for combustion and power at that operating condition, you find that this gasoline, when it vaporizes, it picks up the heat from air because the latent heat of vaporization has to be supplied from air with which it is mixed, and because of that the charge temperature falls. So you have charge which is at a low temperature, and this charge which is at a low temperature allows us to control the temperatures of the components. So you use a rich mixture for internal cooling because the temperatures are high. And if we do not do this, the components will become very hot and the engine could fail. And we call this rich mixture cooling or internal cooling, and this automatically leads to high carbon monoxide levels because the fuel cannot burn completely. It can also lead to high hydrocarbon levels. So this is another reason for high hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide. The next problem which we face is that of knock and pre-ignition. Knock means that the charge inside the cylinder auto ignites before the flame can go and actually allow it to burn. And this occurs because the temperatures become very high. So inside the cylinder, the temperatures could be very high because as I already told you, it's developing one power stroke in every one revolution. And so you could have knock occurring. You could also have pre-ignition, some hot spot in the cylinder which keeps on igniting the charge. There are other issues as well, like high exhaust gas temperature. The two-stroke engine, as it runs, since the component temperatures are high, the exhaust gas temperatures are also high. And high exhaust gas temperatures mean that you cannot use a catalyst in the exhaust for after treatment so easily, because the catalyst could get damaged. Other problem with the catalyst is that the rich mixture which comes also does not, which also means that you need to burn a lot of fuel in the catalyst, and the catalyst temperature can go up. So it is difficult to use a catalytic converter in a two-stroke engine unless some special methods are taken. So ultimately, I've just put some of the important disadvantages that we see in a two-stroke engine: fuel consumption, emissions. And one point to note is that in the two-stroke engine, HC emissions are high at high loads because you're changing a lot of charge and it gets short-circuited. HC emissions are also high at low loads because charge gets diluted and it doesn't burn properly. And CO emissions are high always because you're always forced to use a rich mixture. But there are advantages in terms of the operation of the engine, simplicity, and so on. So what are the applications of the two-stroke engine? We already saw that small vehicles, and then vehicles which can be oriented in any direction, that is power tools. Two-stroke engines incidentally can be tilted upside down and run because there is no oil in the crankcase. And hybrid power packs, and also engines that are meant to work at cold climates like the snowmobile. Here again, two-stroke engines are good because of the simple lubrication system that they use. So there are some applications, even aircraft, small aircraft, very small aircraft, like the remotely piloted aircraft and things like that. Two-stroke is a viable option. But in all these cases, people are looking at two-stroke engines which have been highly optimized, as we can see now, as we'll see now as we proceed. Now, the next thing that I want to tell you is about what we actually have in a two-stroke engine. If I have to represent two-stroke engine's charge, let me represent this as the two-stroke engine cylinder after the scavenging has taken place. This simply represents the volume of the mixture that is present inside the cylinder after scavenging has taken place. So let us say the y-axis is the proportional to the mass of what is present. And during the scavenging process, let us assume that this much is what is entering, this much is air that is being pushed through the transfer port into the cylinder, and I'll call this as mass of air admitted, or MAD. I'll call this as MAD, mass of air that is admitted. It could be mass of air and fuel admitted also, if the air and fuel are mixed together. And under steady operating conditions, or you find that what you push into the cylinder is what that comes out. So the same MAD amount should come out, but it will not be air which will come out, it will be exhaust that is going to come out. So I'll say M exhaust out, which is equal to M admitted. So that much of exhaust should come out. But it may not be only exhaust, it can also be exhaust plus air. And this is the total mass in the cylinder. The mass in the cylinder will be higher than the mass that is admitted into the cylinder, because the mass in the cylinder depends on the total volume of the cylinder and total density of the charge that is present in the cylinder, whereas the amount of air that you send into the cylinder would depend on the throttle position. You can just send a small amount of air or large amount of air, and whatever you send inside is what will be coming out. So inside the cylinder, you will have fresh charge and you will also have some exhaust. Now, out of the air that you admitted inside, some amount may simply go out. So you admitted some amount, and this amount may simply be going out, and this we call as mass of air short circuited. So it just went into the cylinder and simply escaped because the exhaust port and the transfer ports are open together. So if this is just escaping, what is trapped inside the cylinder is only this much. Mass of air that is trapped into the cylinder is only this amount. Okay, so that is what we see here. So, so what I wish to say here is that what is trapped in the cylinder uh, is all the air that is sent into the cylinder is not trapped. Only part of the air that is sent into the cylinder, this is M air is trapped in the cylinder, and the remaining that you have here is the exhaust that was retained from the previous cycle, which has not gone out. So what comes out of the cylinder, which is M exhaust out, partially contains exhaust up to here, and then this portion is the air that is short circuited. So this is what we should remember. With this, we will get to some terms that are normally used in scavenging. I'll just shut down once and. Hmm? So we will. So we'll now go back to the terms, as I told you the same previous thing, where we have some fresh air coming in, some exhaust going out equivalent to that, but the exhaust that is going out, contains both fresh air as well as some of the a little bit of fresh air and mostly exhaust that is actually being scavenged. So the exhaust that is going out is not pure exhaust; it has some fresh air, and in the cylinder you have some exhaust being retained and some fresh air also being retained. So with this background, let us relate to some of the terms that are actually used in scavenging. So the first term that is important is the reference mass. We need to relate everything to a reference mass, and this reference mass is nothing but some reference volume multiplied by the density of the mixture. The density of the mixture is the air fuel mixture that we are allowing into the cylinder, and this reference volume could be whatever we define because it is an accepted reference volume. For example, this reference volume could be V displacement, or it could be V cylinder. It could be the entire cylinder volume, or it could be only the displacement volume. So the reference mass is calculated as V reference into rho mix. Now we also have what is an important term in two-stroke engines is the delivery ratio. Is a delivery ratio, and this delivery ratio. Okay, this delivery ratio is defined as the mass of air delivered by the M reference. This is M reference, and it is normally given as M delivered by M reference, and this M reference is nothing but the displacement volume of the engine into density of the mixture. So this is what we call as delivery ratio. If you very carefully see, this delivery ratio is like the volumetric efficiency of a four-stroke engine. That is the volume of air that you have taken, or the mass of air that you have taken, divided by the reference mass. It is the displacement volume into ambient density. It is very similar to that. So for a two-stroke engine, delivery ratio is like the volumetric efficiency of a four-stroke engine. Then you have other terms, like other very important terms. One of the most important terms is what we call as trapping efficiency. I'm only giving you the very important terms. There are several terms related to scavenging. Trapping efficiency is defined as, what is meant by trapping? We have sent some fresh fuel air mixture into the cylinder, and how much of it is retained in the cylinder is what is given by the trapping efficiency. That is, how well has the engine been able to trap the fresh air fuel mixture that you have sent into the cylinder. So trapping efficiency is mass that has been retained out of that which has been delivered. That is, we delivered something out of which something only has been retained, divided by the mass that we delivered. So we delivered X mass, and out of which only something is retained, and that is what we call as trapping efficiency. So trapping efficiency directly tells us how good our ports are. If the trapping efficiency is low, it means that we have not retained all the charge that we have sent into the cylinder. Some of it has been gone, has escaped. In fact, 1 minus the trapping efficiency will tell you how much you have short circuited. It can even be called as the short circuit ratio or something like that. So trapping efficiency is very, very important. If the trapping efficiency is high, it only means that you have not lost any fresh charge, and your hydrocarbon emissions will be low, and your specific fuel consumption also will be low. If trapping efficiency is bad, we have lost a lot of fresh charge through the exhaust. If you lose a lot of fresh charge through the exhaust, it only means that a lot of exhaust has also been retained inside the cylinder. So bad trapping efficiency means more exhaust in the cylinder and more fuel in the exhaust. Both are bad. The other important term is scavenging efficiency. Now, the scavenging efficiency term is mass of fresh air in the cylinder out of what we delivered. That is, it is actually the mass that is retained, the numerator, whatever we see here. So mass of fresh, we delivered some fresh air out of which something has been retained, which is nothing but the same as this one divided by the total mass in the cylinder. And the total mass in the cylinder will be nothing but the mass of fresh air that you have retained in the cylinder plus the mass that came from the previous cycle which did not go out. So scavenging efficiency is something like a purity of the charge, something like a purity. It's not purity, there is another term called purity also, but it is very close to purity. It tells us in the cylinder charge that we have, how much of it is a fresh charge that came from the, because of good scavenging. So if scavenging efficiency is good, it means that a lot of fresh charge will be there in the cylinder, and combustion will also be good. So trapping efficiency and charging efficiency, traveling and scavenging efficiency are two terms. They are somewhat related, but they give you information on two different aspects. The trapping efficiency tells you how well you have been able to retain all the fresh charge inside a cylinder. The scavenging efficiency tells you how well you have been able to push all the exhaust out and have fresh air inside the cylinder. So they are related actually, but they give you, they sort of relate to different aspects of the scavenging process. So this is how we have all the terms that are normally used. Now we'll go on to charging methods. How can we charge a two-stroke engine? Now there are several methods of charging a two-stroke engine, and basically the methods are by using all methods of charging a two-stroke engine mean that what do you mean by charging a two-stroke engine? The fresh air fuel mixture from the atmosphere and the fuel coming from the fuel coming to the carburetor and the air coming from the atmosphere have to mix in the carburetor, and these two have to go into the crankcase and then into the cylinder. So charging is basically how you are filling the crankcase with fresh fuel air mixture. So it is basically charging the crankcase. And the first method that was most popular earlier was using piston control ports. The second one is reed valve, the third one is rotary valve. We'll see that as we proceed. So piston control ports. What are piston control ports? So you have a piston control port even to allow the fresh charge into the crankcase. We are now not drawing what is happening on the exhaust side or on the transfer port side. I am just drawing what is happening on the crankcase side. So you can have the piston somewhere here. So this is the piston, and the piston is almost let us say at somewhere in the mid stroke. So it is moving up and down like this. I don't want to draw anything below the piston. So as the piston moves up and down, now when the piston moves from bottom dead center to top dead center, this is exposed to the atmosphere, and you will have the carburetor here. So as the piston moves from bottom dead center to top dead center, we find that the bottom of the piston will open this port, and the bottom of the piston will open the port after the piston has moved from BDC. And then when the piston moves down from the top to the bottom, from the top dead center to the bottom dead center, again it closes this port. So if I were to draw the port timing diagram of the intake port, we call this the intake port. The intake port may open somewhere here. Sorry. The intake port may open somewhere here and close somewhere here. If the engine is running like this, intake port open, intake port closes. This is TDC and this is BDC. So when the piston moves up from BDC to TDC, after a particular movement, then the bottom of the piston opens the intake port. But as the piston is moving from BDC to TDC, the pressure in the crankcase is falling, and when the intake port opens, the pressure in the crankcase is low, so the fresh charge will rush like this into the crankcase, and the piston moves up to top dead center, and then when it comes down, again the bottom of the piston closes the intake port and then starts compressing the crankcase. So this phase is the phase where you have induction, and up to this phase, or even from TDC to BDC, you will have compression in the crankcase. So, but this compression means that the compression, but even after compression at BDC, the intake port does not open. It opens only later on. So we can say that the compression process goes up to here, but during this portion, it's actually not compression, it's actually expanding. So the compression process occurs from there to here, and then it is expanded, and the high pressure opens the port somewhere at that point. So this is what is called as a piston control port. And in the piston control port, the point to note is that we have a very small opening duration for the intake port. Intake port opens somewhere there and closes immediately. So it is a simple arrangement because you don't have to use any valves and all that. The piston itself opens and closes the port, but it is not an arrangement which gives us very high volumetric efficiency or very high delivery ratio. It gives us reasonably low delivery ratios, but it is very simple. So this is not very popular. The next arrangement is the reed valve, which is what I drew in the beginning as well. So here you have the, again I'm not drawing the ports, exhaust port and the transfer port. I'm only drawing what is happening below the below the piston, that is in the crankcase. Here you have the piston moving up and down, and you have the intake pipe here, and the intake pipe is coupled to a carburetor, and you have what is called as a reed valve. The reed valve is basically a one-way valve, and it will allow the flow in this direction, but it will not allow the flow in this direction. So it is a one-way valve. So as the piston moves up, whenever the pressure is lower than atmospheric pressure, the reed valve will open and allow the flow to occur. When the piston moves down, whenever the pressure becomes higher than atmospheric pressure, the reed valve will close. So basically the reed valve allows charge to get into the crankcase whenever the piston moves up, and its movement is not at all linked to the engine. Its movement is only based on the pressure differences. So the main advantage of this is, whenever there is low pressure in the crankcase, fresh charge will enter into the crankcase, and whenever there is high pressure in the crankcase, the fresh charge will not escape out of the crankcase. So this is a very good system, and it is the most preferred system today. And if you look at the port timing diagram of this system, when the port will open and when the port will close, in fact it is not fixed. It can open at any time and close at any time depending on the pressures. But normally what happens is, when the engine is running at low speeds, the pressure in the crankcase becomes lower. This is BDC. The pressure in the crankcase becomes lower than atmospheric pressure when the piston starts moving up. So some angle after BDC, the reed valve opens, and the reed valve stays open, and the pressure in the crankcase becomes above atmospheric pressure when the piston starts moving down. So somewhere here reed valve can close. So this is how the reed valve actually works. Somewhere here it opens and somewhere here it closes. And this we call as low speed. I'm going to draw what happens at high speeds. At high speeds, what happens is the reed valve doesn't open immediately because the reed valve takes some time to open. So it may open later and later. I'll call it as HS, high speeds. Similarly, it may close later and later at high speeds. So there's a delay in opening, there's a delay in closing also. So this happens with the reed valve. But the point to note is with speed it is automatically changing and it tries to adjust and tries to give you the best. But one of the problems is when the flow occurs through the reed valve, there can be a pressure drop. Because the reed valve needs some pressure to open, so there's a slight drop in volumetric efficiency. But it is much better than what you have in the piston control port. The next method is called the rotary valve. For the rotary valve system, I will again draw a very simple sketch of the rotary valve. The rotary valve can be of many forms. I am just drawing one of the forms. Let's say this is the rotary valve. In the rotary valve, what we do is we have a slot, we have a slit cut on the rotary valve, something like this. So this is a slit cut on the rotary valve, and if I have to show it at some cross section, the slit may be somewhere here. This is material and the slit has been cut. It's a thick disc on which you have cut something like this. And there is a casing on the rotary valve which comes like this. And this gets attached to the engine. So this disc is actually run by the engine. I'm only drawing a schematic. And let us say that this disc is enclosed on both sides. And this output is fed to the engine. So this is the crankcase. So this output goes to the crankcase. So what happens is when the slot, this is an intake pipe, this is the pipe which goes into the crankcase. When the disc is in line, when the hole in the disc is in line with these two pipes, there is a communication from the atmosphere into the crankcase. And if the disc rotates and this portion comes here, then nothing can flow into the crankcase. So as the disc is running along with the engine, then the slot will get exposed and both the pipes, the one which is going to the cylinder and the one which is coming from the atmosphere, both these pipes may be connected through the disc valve. And when the slot moves out, the disc valve obstructs this connection. So it means that the disc valve can open and close the connection to the crankcase whenever it is required. The actual arrangement may not be like this, is only a schematic. In the actual arrangement, this pipe is not there, the disc valve is directly on the crankcase. But this is just a schematic. So in this case, what happens is, you can make the disc valve open wherever you want and close wherever you want. So if this is BDC and this is TDC, you can make the disc valve to open like the reed valve somewhere here, and you can make it close also like the reed valve somewhere here. This is, though this is linked to the engine, it is not linked to the piston. It is linked only to the disc valve. So you can cut the slot in such a way that the disc valve opens here, the disc valve closes here, and this is rotating. This is the rotating part of this valve, and the whole thing can occur the way you want. The main advantage with the disc valve is that the timings are unsymmetrical, whereas if you look at the piston control ports, the timings are symmetrical. The second advantage of the reed valve is, disc valve is, there is no reed valve, so there is no pressure drop. So this is perhaps the best arrangement for volumetric efficiency. But it can work well only at one speed. It cannot work at all speeds, because at other speeds you want to change the timing and it cannot change. Whereas the reed valve is not the best arrangement for any speed, but for all speeds it works well because it keeps on adjusting itself for different speeds. So this is the most popular. And all two-wheelers small engines make use of this arrangement, but this can give you the highest power, because it can give you lot of air, but it can give highest power only at one speed, the speed for which it is designed. So this is how the disc valve and the rotary valve and the reed valve work, and this is how they perform. So next we will move on to uh, I've already told this, the scavenging methods. Now we already saw what is scavenging. Scavenging is nothing but removing the exhaust from the cylinder during the blowdown period and putting fresh fuel air mixture into the cylinder and pushing the exhaust out, and in the process not losing any fresh charge through the exhaust port. There are different methods of scavenging. The first method of scavenging is what is called as cross scavenging, where I am now not going to draw the crankcase, I am going to draw only the portion above the piston, because that is what is relevant for scavenging. This is the exhaust port, I'll call it EP, and then you have the transfer port, which is located below the exhaust port. So the bottom level portion of the transfer and port and the exhaust port are at the same level, but when it comes to top level, the exhaust port is above the transfer port, and we call this as the exhaust lead in terms of angle. When we convert it to angle, we call it exhaust lead. So this sort of an arrangement is called the cross scavenging, because these two ports are opposite each other. So in this case, the piston which you use, if I draw the piston here, the piston that we use has to be slightly complicated, because it should not allow the fresh charge to directly go into the exhaust. So the piston we use may be something like this. It will have what is called as a deflector. So the deflector allows the fresh charge to go up. I'll draw the fresh charge in blue, and allows the fresh charge to go up and allows the exhaust to go down like this. This is exhaust, this is fresh. So it makes them sort of tries to separate these two out, so that the fresh charge will not directly go out. So you don't want it to directly go out, so the deflector sort of controls this. But you have problems with the deflector. The deflector is heavy because it's a mass on the piston. The deflector becomes hot, and even though you have the deflector, there is some chance of the direct short circuit of the fresh charge through the exhaust port. But this system is simple, and in many very small engines this system was adopted, but this system is almost outdated now. It is not used in two-wheelers. This is simple but not very effective. It is called cross scavenging. The next method, which is very effective and which is widely used, is what is called as the loop scavenging. The loop scavenging method is the one which is most popular in all small vehicles. And in the loop scavenging engine, I am going to draw the plan and elevation of this arrangement. Otherwise, we will not be able to make out. So this is the plan view of the cylinder, and I'll draw the elevation of the cylinder. And as usual, we have the exhaust port somewhere here, we have the exhaust port somewhere here, and the transfer port. So the exhaust port, if you see here, it is somewhere here, that is shown at the elevation at the bottom, and the transfer port is actually here. If you see the cross scavenging arrangement, the transfer port, this is the transfer port, and this is the exhaust port. Transfer port is in front of the exhaust port, whereas here it is on the sides of the exhaust port. So the transfer port basically is located somewhere here. This is transfer port 1 and 2. Transfer port 1, transfer port 2. So you have the two transfer ports somewhere here, and the cylinder head is slightly curved. So what you find is that the fresh charge from the crankcase, shown in, let us say, black here, will come like this, will come like this into the cylinder, meet somewhere at this point. The two jets will meet. That means they'll come like this, meet somewhere, and then form a loop. And the exhaust will, in the meanwhile, will be going like this. The exhaust will be going like this. So this is why we call as a loop scavenging arrangement. So the fresh charge is directed against the exhaust. It is not directed towards the exhaust. This is a very big advantage. So direct short circuiting from here is less. So you don't have too much of direct short circuiting. You get very high scavenging efficiencies with this arrangement. And the piston is flat because the piston is not deflecting the charge. So it's a simple piston. The port is complicated. Sometimes we may have additional transfer ports as well. You can even have 5 transfer ports all located on these sides, but the aim is to direct all the fuel. From this also you will direct it like this, all the fresh fuel air mixture away from the exhaust and form a loop which will push the exhaust out. So this is the best method and gives you the highest possible scavenging efficiency in small engines. The third method is what we call as the uniflow scavenging method. The uniflow scavenging method, I'll draw the engine in the horizontal direction. The uniflow scavenging method is simple. There are many ways of getting the uniflow scavenging arrangement, and one such method is this, which I am showing. You can have 2 pistons. This is basically for large engines. You can have 2 pistons, and both these pistons are connected to their own crankshafts. So this is what we call as an opposed piston engine. So the crankshafts may be rotating in opposite directions. The pistons are moving back and forth. On one side, you may have ports which are called the on this side you can have ports on the cylinder, and on this side also you can have ports on the cylinder. This piston opens these ports, this piston opens these ports. So as the pistons move apart, when they go to bottom dead center and top dead center, the port one set of pistons is opened by one set of ports is opened by one piston, the other set by the other piston. So this could be the intake or the transfer, and this could be the exhaust. So what happens is, when the exhaust port first opens, the exhaust gases go out like this, and the fresh charge, when this opens, fresh charge comes like this. So the fresh charge comes like this, and the exhaust goes like this. So in the cylinder you have flow in one direction, and we call this the uniflow scavenging. This obviously is for big engines where you need to have 2 pistons and 2 ports and 2 sets of ports and all that. But even in small engines you can achieve this by using valves. So you can have a valve on the top, and you can have ports at the bottom, and these ports can be fed with fresh air, and this could be exhaust. So when the piston moves down, if this is a piston and it has come somewhere here, fresh charge can come like this, and the exhaust can go like this. So the exhaust gases can go out on the top, and fresh charge can come from the bottom, and this could again be uniflow. Only thing is a 2-stroke engine which also uses a valve, so it is more complicated. So such engines are also there. They can also be for big engines. There are also smaller engines which work like this. But this is the best method of scavenging, because the fresh charge and the exhaust do not mix. They are moving in the same direction. So you have loop scavenging, which is the best for small engines. You have uniflow scavenging, which is the best overall, but it's only for big engines. And you also have the cross scavenging, which is good for very, very small engines and low cost applications, but it is no longer very popular. So these are the different scavenging arrangements. So before we move further to developments in 2-stroke engines, we can take another 10 minutes. Before we move on to the development in 2-stroke engines, I just thought I'll show you some performance parameters, how a 2-stroke engine performs. If you look at I told you the main problem is scavenging. That is, during scavenging you have fresh charge going out of the exhaust, which means hydrocarbon emissions in a 2-stroke engine will be high. The other point which I also want to tell you is the hydrocarbon. I also told you about delivery ratio. And delivery ratio is like volumetric efficiency. Is like volumetric efficiency of four-stroke engine. That means if you have a high delivery ratio, you are sending more charge into the cylinder. If you send more, and how do you control the delivery ratio? By the throttle. If you open the throttle of a two-stroke engine, we send more charge into the cylinder, delivery ratio goes up. If the delivery ratio goes up, more charge goes into the cylinder and the exhaust is pushed out properly. But if more charge goes into the cylinder, you will also find that more charge will go into the exhaust. So if you look at full throttle performance of a two-stroke engine, delivery ratio is always given the symbol L. Delivery ratio is high. So when delivery ratio is high, more charge will also go through the exhaust. More charge goes into the cylinder. It pushes the exhaust well, but it is also going out. So the amount of charge that will go out through the exhaust depends on delivery ratio. When the delivery ratio is very small, you put a very small quantity of charge into the cylinder that does not go out. So you find that hydrocarbon emissions are low at part throttle. Hydrocarbon emissions are high at full throttle. Combustion is definitely better at full throttle, but still hydrocarbon emissions are high because at full throttle, short circuiting is very high. You also find that somewhere around stoichiometric conditions, the hydrocarbon emissions are minimum at part throttle because at that condition, combustion is good. And if you make the mixture rich, combustion is bad. Lean also, combustion is bad. Hydrocarbons appear at part throttle. Whereas at full throttle, hydrocarbon is mainly dominated by short circuiting, so it is always there. But if you make the mixture leaner and leaner, naturally less hydrocarbons come out of the exhaust, so you find that the HC levels fall. This is the trend that we normally observe. After this, maybe hydrocarbons will once again go up because of misfire. But that is not a region where we normally operate. If you look at the BMEP, BMEP is nothing but a representation of the torque divided by displacement volume. You find that the BMEP at part throttle is definitely less than full throttle, and the BMEP peaks close to rich mixtures, around 14:1 or so air fuel ratio, which is slightly rich for gasoline. It is around the same value for full throttle but slightly leaner, and in both the cases you find that it is peaking around rich mixtures, and full throttle BMEP obviously is higher than part throttle BMEP because you send more fuel. If you look at brake specific fuel consumption, which is an indication of thermal efficiency, you find that inverse of thermal efficiency, you find that at full throttle the brake specific fuel consumption is more. That means thermal efficiency is less. Part throttle thermal efficiency is better. I'm not looking at very low part throttles, reasonably low part throttle, something like 25% throttle, where combustion is also good. This is 100% throttle. So at full throttle, why BSFC is good even though combustion is good is because at full throttle you have short circuiting. Lot of fuel air mixture gets into the cylinder and gets short circuited, whereas at part throttle it's not short circuited, so the efficiency are better. But when you go into the lean region, part throttle becomes higher because here you have misfiring. The engine starts to misfire, whereas at full throttle misfiring occurs only very late because full throttle combustion is good. There is no charge del. This is because of charge dilution. So this is what we see. So I'll now move on to some of the, I'm not looking at everything, I'm just moving on to some of the important aspects of two-stroke. We'll come back to this depending on the time that we have. So what are the methods by which we can improve a two-stroke engine? What are the current methods? So we have seen all this, and if I have to summarize the problems, we have dilution, and short circuiting as the main problems of two-stroke engines. Short circuiting and dilution both can be controlled by scavenging. You improve your scavenging process, you can control, but there is a limit because you saw there are so many constraints on scavenging, the port orientation and things like that. So people are now adopting different methods to control a two-stroke, to improve a two-stroke engine. What they are resorting to is direct fuel injection. That means what you do is you inject the fuel directly into the cylinder after all the ports close. So if you look at the first figure that we had, After the piston moves and closes the ports, and only air is trapped, that is, the piston is somewhere here, let us say, and only air is trapped inside the cylinder. That means to run the engine, you don't have a carburetor. You only allow air through the crankcase. This air goes into the crankcase and goes inside and scavenges. And even if it is short circuited, only air will be short circuited. Then when the piston moves and closes the ports, you have only air inside the cylinder. Then you inject the fuel into the cylinder. So this is what we call as direct fuel injection. So direct fuel injection is the best method to avoid short circuiting because there is no fuel mixed with air. Air alone gets into the cylinder and scavenges, and fuel is directly injected into the cylinder. This is a straightforward method, and it is sort of a sure method. But when you really apply this direct fuel injection in an engine, you find that there are problems. It is not as straightforward as it appears because of the inherent difficulties in running it in an engine. The first difficulty in direct fuel injection is the time available. You are going to inject the fuel after the piston crosses the exhaust, and the piston is somewhere here. It has crossed the exhaust and transfer ports and it's moving up, and at this point you want to inject the fuel into the cylinder. And when the exhaust port closes, I think the if you recollect, you'll I don't think I told you the numbers. When the exhaust port closes, the piston would have already crossed about 60 degrees after VDC. That is, the piston has moved already up by 60 degrees, and compression ends at 180 degrees. That means you have only about 120 degrees of compression, and in that short time you have to inject the fuel, mix the fuel and air, and then prepare it for combustion. So it becomes very difficult. So the main problem with direct injection is the time that is available. And the other problem in the two-stroke engine is speed is very high in a two-stroke engine. It can go to high speeds. It can go to 10,000 RPM, 12,000 RPM easily. And then the time becomes even shorter. So in direct injection, you want to inject the fuel after the ports close, but you may not be able to do it after the ports close because after the ports close, you have very little time. So even though you want to do it after ports close, you may inject it even before the ports close. So this is one of the fundamental problems with direct injection. But direct injection definitely can avoid short circuiting to a very large extent. So how do we reduce this time, or how can we inject in a very short time? In the short time, what we want to do is we want to inject the fuel as well as mix the fuel with air. So one of the ways to control this is to use air assisted injection. That means you don't inject fuel only into the cylinder, you inject fuel with a blast of air. So this blast of air atomizes the fuel well, and it is a rich fuel air mixture which gets into the cylinder. So this can mix easily and burn, so you don't need to have too much of time for mixture preparation. So this reduces mixture preparation time. So you can reduce mixture preparation time by going into what is called as air assisted injection, and that's what I want to show you here. So these kinds of two-stroke engines are I won't say they are becoming popular. They are there for the last, I would say, around 15 years or so, and in some applications they are popular. In small two-wheeler scooters, they are popular, and even in India there are some companies which try to experiment with them and try to implement them on auto rickshaws, and some auto rickshaws are even now running with this. In the direct injection with air, you have a small compressor attached to the engine. This is a very small compressor. If the engine is 150 cc, this compressor may be a few cc. It's a very small compressor. This compressor compresses air into an injector. So even electronically controlled injector, which I'll show you, compresses air into an injector. There's a fuel pump which pumps fuel into the injector, and there is an electronic control unit which we call the ECU, which will allow this air and fuel to get into the cylinder. So there are basically two injectors. One is the fuel injector, and the other one is the mixture injector. So these are all timed to work together, and then you have air assisted injection. With the air assisted injection, the main benefit is you don't have to have a lot of time for mixture preparation because air is used to atomize the fuel. And the other thing is you have low pressure injection. The fuel pressure can be about 5 to 7 bar, that's all. Whereas if you look at direct liquid fuel injection, fuel pressure can go even to 100 to 200 bar. So this is a low cost, I won't say low cost, a low pressure operating system suitable for small engines. I'll just explain this system. This shows the photograph of one such system, which uses this is what is called as the orbital system. And this system was actually invented by or developed by Orbital. So this system shows the small compressor here. There is a fuel injector here, electronically controlled fuel injector. It is basically air injector and fuel injector, and you have an oil pump supplying oil for lubrication at the right level. So the principle is shown here for the injector. You have compressed air coming into a cavity. The compressor compresses compressed air into a small cavity. This cavity may be 1 or 2 cc. That's all, very small cavity. And you have fuel being put into this cavity by a fuel injector. So this cavity contains compressed air and fuel. And then you have a third injector, a secondary injector, a second injector, which is a mixture control injector. So whenever you want this air and fuel to get into the cylinder, you open this mixture control injector and the blasts of air and fuel will go inside. So the sequence is, first you put compressed air, then you put fuel, or first you put fuel and then you put compressed air, but this fuel and compressed air will not get into the cylinder. Whenever you want the injection to occur, you open this compressed air and fuel into the cylinder through the mixture injector. That's what you see here. So basically two injectors, one for fuel and one for mixture. And the typical controller of this system would mean that you need to sense the crankshaft position, that there will be an electronic controller which will receive the crankshaft position. From the crankshaft position, it will calculate the speed, how crankshaft position is changing, it will calculate speed, determine what is the best spark timing, determine what is the best quantity of fuel, all quantities related to the injection. The driver is changing the throttle, that information also goes inside. The controller also controls the oil pump, which is supposed to inject a small amount of oil into the intake for lubrication, which I told you earlier. And the controller ultimately controls the fuel injector and the mixture injector, which we saw, and also the spark. So all this is controlled simultaneously. And you see what sort of a jet you get. It is not like a fuel spray. You get something like a cloud of air and fuel coming out of the injector. So it is almost prepared, and it only has to go and mix with the remaining air and form a combustible mixture. So this is what is air injection, air assisted injection, low cost, low pressure air assisted injection. And you get tremendous improvements in performance when you implement it on a two-stroke engine. This is a typical performance curve of two-stroke engine using this air assisted injector. This is the brake thermal efficiency before air injection, that is normal two-stroke engine. This is the brake thermal efficiency you get when you add air assisted injection. You see a big jump in the brake thermal efficiency. This is almost going towards four-stroke engine levels. Hydrocarbon emissions was so high, it has been brought down to even below 500 ppm, from something like 1500 to 2000 ppm. So there is a significant drop in emissions because short circuiting has been avoided by direct injection. There is also a significant improvement in brake thermal efficiency because of reduction in short circuiting. This is possible with direct injection. So people are working with these kinds of systems, and these systems are compact, but they are not very simple. They are complicated, but they are compact and very efficient, and they can be used on certain applications now. This is another low cost direct injection system. So again, you can see this is another kind of system which was developed at IIT Madras, and I have taken it actually from the PhD work of Mr. Loganathan. And you find here that you again have a small compressor. Only thing is this system does not use so much of electronics. You take air from a small compressor, push this air into a small injector, mechanically operated injector, and the air from the compressor is timed using a compressor timing valve, which you can see here. And so this air pushes the fuel into the cylinder. So this was implemented on an auto rickshaw engine. And again you see the improvements. Carburation gives you this red line, injection gives you this blue line. Big improvement in efficiency and significant drop in emissions. So by shifting to direct injection, we can benefit a lot. The another method which people are also thinking of is what we call as the cylinder barrel based injection. The injector is not located on the cylinder head, it is located on the cylinder barrel. As you can see here, in the previous case, the injector was actually located on the cylinder head. Whereas here, and when it is located on cylinder head, the injector temperature goes up and the injector durability suffers. So here we don't locate it on the cylinder head, we locate it on the cylinder barrel. And when you see here, it is somewhere out at this point. And this is also an air assisted injector. So from the cylinder barrel, we inject the fuel, Only thing is, we inject it in such an angle that it goes close to the spark plug to form a mixture. And the advantage is even lower pressures can be used because it is not injected from cylinder head, and the injector is not exposed to high temperatures and pressures. So it is more durable. In fact, if you very closely observe, this injector body is made out of plastic, and this injector can sit on the cylinder head. So things have advanced so much that you can have an injector made out of a plastic body and you can put it on the cylinder head of the engine. It still withstands. So this also gives you good improvements in performance, and I can show here the performance at full throttle. You have an efficiency of about 18% for carburation or even manifold injection, whereas your efficiency is crossing 20% for the cylinder barrel injection. Hydrocarbon emissions of 4,000 ppm at full throttle has come down to something like 4,000 ppm. So fourfold drop in hydrocarbon emissions. All this is possible with fuel injection. So cylinder injection, cylinder barrel injection, all these are feasible. So ultimately, I would come to this brings us to the end of the lecture, because this is the time and we go to another topic, and we find here that the two-stroke engine has inherent benefits, it has inherent problems, and people have found out ways and means of improving the two-stroke engine, but it is no longer a very simple two-stroke engine. We are willing to make it more complicated, and we are willing to make use of electronics and advances in fuel injection systems to improve the two-stroke engine. And one way is to resort to direct injection or cylinder barrel injection, and air-assisted cylinder barrel or air-assisted direct injection. And these can give you tremendous improvements in performance, and the two-stroke engine can go closer to the four-stroke engine. And because of its advantages of compactness, it can, in some applications, be even more preferred as compared to the four-stroke engine. So with this, I would like to conclude this talk, and if you have